everyone, my name is Jamie Smith. I'm the Emergency Response Investigation Supervisor for CYFD here in San Juan County. It's a very long title that has almost zero importance, just so you know. A little bit about me, I've been with CYFD for a combined total of about 9 years. I've also done 2 years of forensic interviewing, so I can answer a little bit in regards to that if it comes to it. But for tonight, I'm going to kind of go over CYFD 101. I don't have the same fancy slides with my contact information, so afterwards, if you need to talk to me for any reason, I'm happy to provide you with my email and my phone number. So first and foremost, going over our vision. Our vision is a New Mexico where children, youth, and families are healthy, safe, thriving, and strengthened by their culture and their community. So basically, when it comes to CYFD, Heather was correct, we don't have the power that a lot of people think that we do. We can't just walk into a home and rip children out of that home. And ultimately, our goal is not to do that. We would rather provide families with resources to function more effectively than remove a child from their family. But our mission is to nurture the strength and resilience of families, partner with the children, families, and communities based on trust and transparency, and serve by listening and learn from our diverse cultures to keep children, youth, and families healthy, safe, and thriving. So CYFD was divided into pillars, and I'm going to let you know that there is a more updated version of this PowerPoint. Unfortunately, I don't have it. They create these in Santa Fe. So those pillars have essentially been disbanded. So initially it was divided into permanency, investigations, and licensing. We've now combined investigations and permanency back together. However, they are still two different functions within our department. But the primary pillars are protective services, which is who I work for, family services, juvenile justice, and behavioral health. So when it comes to working with our families, we utilize all of these pillars in order to get the services and the assistance that these families need to function more effectively. When it comes to protective services, the Protective Services Division of the New Mexico Children, Youth, and Families Department is charged with investigating all reports of child abuse or neglect in accordance with the New Mexico Children's Code. So on top of all of the laws and things like that, there's the Children's Code is what governs our agency's practices. The Protective Services Division is mandated to investigate reports of children in need of protection from abuse and/or neglect by their parent, guardian, or custodian. CYFD Protective Services takes immediate action to protect children and youth whose safety cannot be assured in their current circumstances. So basically what that's saying is, you know, we're here to step in and help when parents are unable to do so. Again, the difference pillars that are now just, I guess, departments within our agency is investigations, adoption, resource foster care, and then Reach New Mexico. Investigations is the portion of the division who receives the reports of the child maltreatment 24 hours a day. So for example, with me being the emergency response supervisor, I come in at 3 o'clock every day and I'm in the office until midnight every night. This is a new shift that was created about October of last year. Even still, we have somebody who is functioning 24/7. So if there's not somebody physically in the office, we have an on-call worker that will respond if Sky does call us out. The adoption unit are the workers who actually work with our families once we have gone to the judge and said, hey, this child is not safe in this home. So we feel like it's more appropriate for us to remove them and work with the family for the long term. When it comes to the adoptions unit, our adoptions unit has 1 year to determine whether or not we can safely return that child to their family. If we cannot safely return that child to their family within that first year, we have to change their plan from reunification to adoption. I will tell you that when we remove children from their homes, the primary focus is locating a fit and willing relative who can care for that child. Because regardless of the situation, it is a traumatic event for a child to be removed from their home. So if we can't keep them with their parents whom they love, regardless of what their parents may or may not have done to them, we want to keep them with somebody who they have a close connection to. And that's to minimize the amount of trauma that they have to experience in that process. If for some reason we still cannot get through the process within the first 24 months, at that point, the child, if they have been placed for 6 months with their current resource, they will be available for adoption, and at that point, that family is eligible to adopt that child. We do push more for guardianship because that does buy parents a little bit more time to get their stuff together. Guardianships do not terminate parental rights, whereas an adoption requires a termination of parental rights. Resource and foster care is actually a portion of our agency who handles all of the licensing of our resource homes. They used to be called foster homes, but there's a stigma around being called a foster child or a foster parent. And we would rather our kids be treated as a member of the family of those who take them in than just a spare child who they've just taken in out of the kindness of their hearts. So we labeled that whole process into resource homes because these people are going out of their way to make these kids feel like they have a family when their family can't be there for them. And then the Reach New Mexico, I believe, is our text service where kids can actually text directly if they're not feeling safe at home. And we do receive reports through the Reach New Mexico, but Reach New Mexico also will connect these children and their families with resources without screening a report in if it does not rise to the level of abuse or neglect. The Family Services Division does help connect families with resources as well. Most of our REACH calls do go through the Family Services Division. Our goal is to support the families before a crisis situation. So again, getting families hooked up with those resources and addressing the primary issues is our primary focus. And if we can do that before it rises to the level of an investigation, we'd like to do that. So with family services, there are several different portions. The CARA plan is our most recent addition. We just had the 1-year anniversary of the CARA team. The CARA plan is actually created for those children who are born exposed to substances, and it's multi-substances. The CARA team will reach out to new moms at the hospital once they've tested positive for, just for example, methamphetamines and fentanyl. So they'll reach out, they'll create a plan of care for that mom, and they'll actually have a home visitor come and work with mom and baby to make sure that the baby's meeting milestones. They're put in touch with developmental services. The big part of that a lot of people don't understand is that these moms definitely need to engage in these services out of the gate because those cases do come through as reports if they do fall off, if they stop attending those services or they stop participating in those CARA calls. It's also to help ensure that these babies are receiving all of their follow-up care as needed. So a lot of the babies that are born positive are going to end up having withdrawal symptoms, or there are going to be medical concerns that are ongoing, and we need to make sure that they are receiving the appropriate care. So other things that we have available are the family resource centers. They're community-based resource hubs, and they're designed to provide families access to services and supports that promote their health and well-being. In-home services, we do have an in-home services team that will go in and work with families at the investigation level so that we can close out the investigation and hopefully get the family addressing the concerns that brought them under our radar in the first place. We have a multi-level response team who actually takes on a lot of our neglect cases, as long as it doesn't have anything to do with emotional neglect. So they're handling educational neglect, medical neglect, lack of supervision, things that can be addressed with, simple parenting, or maybe the family is on hard times right now. They can't afford to purchase enough food to get through the whole month, or their food stamps aren't making it to the end of the month. So they're hooking them up with resources to address those concerns. We have the Fostering Connections, and Fostering Connections is a group of our agency who are working with our youth who have aged out of the system. So they've been in foster care and then they turned 18 and they weren't adopted or they weren't returned to their parents. So our Fostering Connections folks will actually help get those kids set up with services. They can get college funds, they can get apartment funds. They have a lot of access to housing resources for our kids that are aging out of the system as well. So Keeping Families Together actually is a program that provides a comprehensive array of services to the families who are homeless or maybe lack stable nighttime residence. So we have a lot of moms or dads or kids that are couch surfing right now. You know, maybe they've fallen on hard times, they've lost their house, they can't get into a new one right now. So Keeping Families Together will help with that. Juvenile justice, obviously we do have kids that have some behavioral concerns. And juvenile justice does help address those concerns. We have the ability to make a referral even if there isn't a delinquent behavior. Generally, probation only happens once there's delinquent behavior. However, we can actually get them connected with juvenile justice in another aspect so that we have that additional supervision for those behaviors. And the same with behavioral health. We team with our behavioral health unit on a regular basis. Mental health concerns in this county are pretty high. We have a lot of kids who do struggle with PTSD and they struggle with other trauma-based issues. And a lot of the diagnoses that are being doled out, they're not old enough to be diagnosed with. So our behavioral health unit helps us to access the appropriate resources for them to try and address those concerns before they become a bigger problem. And I don't know how I just did that, but I just skipped a slide. So that's family services. Oh, I went backwards. So the CYFD foundations. We have the Office of the Secretary, Office of General Counsel. General Counsel is our legal umbrella. They are the ones that we talk to when we have concerns for kids. We do have legal or lawyers within our office that we staff with or we talk about the cases with to determine whether we have enough to actually proceed with removal of children when we have big concerns. Office of Tribal Affairs helps us to connect with the tribes and really work with the tribes in finding additional resources to assist our families. We have a lot of traditional families that we work with, and we want to make sure that we are respecting their practices just as much as we are honoring the needs of the children in our community. We have the Office of Performance and Accountability, and they actually do what's called a quality assurance review every single year on our offices. And they pull random files from our offices. They go in, they make sure that we're doing everything that we're supposed to be doing for our families. We have communications, and that's where Sky is kind of housed under. They actually take in those reports and they send out the reports to each county. So once they've received a report, they screen it for where it's located and they assign it to the appropriate county, contact the supervisor who's responsible for taking those calls that day. And then we have the Office of Advocacy. That Office of Advocacy is actually there to advocate for the needs and the wants of our children in care. This is a very outdated slide, so I'm going to go ahead and move past it. We need to update our organizational chart on this. We also have program support and operations. So we have our administrative services. That's going to include our secretaries and our office admins who help to maintain our buildings. We have our IT folks who try to help keep our computers and our internet and everything else up and running smoothly. Human resources who handles our hiring, and then policy and procedure. I can tell you right now, our policy and procedure is updated just about twice a month. And the reason for that is because there's a never-ending cycle of things that are changing within the way that we do our work. So we may have a new policy that goes into effect next week, and I won't know that until it comes out. So this is the end of the slideshow, which is a basic overview of CYFD. I did pull some information from our previous slideshow because I feel like it's more important to know more about what the child abuse and neglect is, about reporting, and as much as I hate to say it, about how the investigations work, because you guys are going to deal with the investigators probably more often than our permanency workers. So when it comes to child abuse and neglect, we handle a lot of different types of abuse and neglect. But if you want to know what is an abused child, it's a child who has suffered or is at risk of suffering serious harm. A child who has suffered physical, emotional, or psychological abuse. A child who has suffered sexual abuse or sexual exploitation. A child who is placed in a situation that endangers their life or health. Or a child who is cruelly confined or cruelly punished. So when you look at the Children's Code, which is what I referred to when we look at, is this a case where we're going to have to remove a child? Physical abuse under the Children's Code includes, but is not limited to, any case in which the child exhibits evidence of skin bruising, bleeding, malnutrition, failure to thrive, burns, fracture of any bone, subdural hematoma, soft tissue swelling, or death. I wish I could say that we don't have a lot of those, but there's times when we have multiples within a month, and it's not the easiest thing to get through as a worker because we see a lot of things every single day. But when it comes down to it, these are very important signs to be looking for, and it's very hard to know what a brain bleed would look like. But I can tell you that bruising inside a child's ear is pretty concerning. And I see it more often than I like to admit. Moving on to the sexual abuse definition in the Children's Code. Sure. So, a lot of times parents will say, oh, well, I pull their ear when they're in trouble. But one of the signs of a brain bleed is swelling or bruising in the child's ear or behind their ear. And that's usually where we're going to see that, especially in our littles. And so those are things that, it may be nothing. And as Heather was saying before, if you're not sure, just report it. We'll come out and we'll do it. We can set up a CART exam, which is a child abuse recognition team. They will do a full scan of the child and see if it's something that's related to child abuse or if it's a natural cause. So we have access to resources to help us determine those things, but we can't investigate it if we don't know about it. Any other questions before I move on? Is it the inside the ear? I've seen both. So inside, behind, I've seen it inside the ear. I've seen it on the earlobe that rolled back into behind the ear and down the neck. So I've seen a lot, but I've been doing this for a long time. So, but I mean, there's other things, you can see a handprint. Teeth marks. And, sometimes parents will be like, oh, well, their sister bit them. How big is their sister and how big are those teeth marks? The other part of that is maybe we just report it anyway and we can figure it out from there. Because I would rather you report something that's nothing than not report it and then that child goes home and gets hurt worse tonight. Any other questions? Sexual abuse under the Children's Code includes but not limited to criminal sexual contact, incest, or criminal sexual penetration, as those acts are defined by state law. Sexual exploitation includes but is not limited to allowing, permitting, or encouraging a child to engage in prostitution, allowing, permitting, encouraging, or engaging a child in obscene or pornographic photographing, or filming or depicting a child for obscene or pornographic commercial purposes, as those acts are defined by state law. And then the other part is, what is a neglected child? It's a child who has been abandoned, a child who is without proper subsistence, education, medical care, or other care, a child whose parent has failed to protect them from harm, a child whose parent is not able to care for them due to incarceration or hospitalization. So when you're looking at warning signs of abuse and neglect, and before I go any further, I actually wanted to ask, if you had to guess, with the kids that are currently in state custody, what is the most common reason that they're brought into custody? Is it physical abuse, neglect, or sexual abuse? And that's true. Neglect is the highest cause of us being able to file for custody because it's the easiest to document and it's the most commonly reported. I will say that physical abuse is a lot harder to prove, especially if we don't have the bruising or we don't have a disclosure or things like that. The other part of that, when you're talking about reporting, and I'm going to go into that a little bit more, is Heather is right. Don't ask any direct questions, because when you ask direct questions, it starts feeding information to the child that they may not have had in the first place. But when you're looking at warning signs of physical abuse, it's unexplained bruises, marks, burns, fractures, loss of appetite, sleep disturbances, sexually transmitted diseases we have seen, repeated urinary tract infections, wetting or soiling themselves when they didn't previously. You'll see regressions in children's behaviors when they're being abused. And it could be something so awful as they're smearing feces on the wall now, and they never did that before. Or they're having accidents, but they've been potty trained for the last 8 months. What's going on? There's also behavioral signs, abrupt changes in their behavior, clinginess, aggressiveness, withdrawal, fear of a certain person or a place. So you'll see their demeanor change if their abuser is near. Discomfort with physical contact. So maybe it's a child that used to come in and hug you every day, and now all of a sudden they don't want you to touch them at all. Touching another child's private parts, and suicidal ideation. So one of the biggest things is we understand that developing children are curious about their bodies, and they start to discover their body parts at a very young age. I've got my 1-year-old grandson at my house right now, and he's decided that he likes his penis when I'm trying to change his diaper. He'll reach down and grab it, and it is what it is. But we change his diaper, and he doesn't mess with it after that. It's not as concerning when a child is touching themselves or discovering their own body as it is when they're touching other children. Because when it moves from self-discovery to discovering other people, it's a sign that there may be something going on. And I'm not saying that it always is. But what I would rather see is that get reported and we find that nothing is there, than for not to be reported and then all of a sudden they're on the news because they were part of a big ring of child pornography. They've been filmed touching other kids for that purpose. And I have had a case like that as well. So what should you ask a child? If you suspect that a child is being hurt physically, emotionally, remain calm and do not ask leading questions, as I said before. So don't say things like, is your mom hitting you with a belt? Let the child tell their story. So if they come to you and say, hey, my mom's boyfriend hits me. Oh, wow, thank you for sharing that with me. And if they want to continue talking, let them talk until they take a breath. At that point, it's most important that you report it so that we can get out there, we can get the investigation started, because that's when a forensic interview is going to be the most important. When we aren't asking any questions, but we are letting the child tell the story. We always thank them for telling us what they tell us, because we don't want them to feel like we don't believe them. I will usually lead into that with, I really appreciate you telling me what you just told me. And I really am happy that you're comfortable enough with me to say that. I do feel like I have a friend who's a little bit more appropriate to talk to you about this. And would it be okay if we put this conversation on hold for a little bit so that you don't have to say this over and over and over again? And a lot of times kids will appreciate that, especially when they're 7, 8, 9 years old. And it's embarrassing to talk about things like that, especially when it's those sexual abuse cases. And then, of course, after they tell their story, please listen and report everything that you can from that conversation. I know that you guys had a conversation about, the immediate reporting, and is it appropriate if they're not comfortable reporting for the supervisor to do it? That's fine, but I would really like the person who has the first-hand information available to provide any additional details during that reporting process. And then, of course, going back into the reporting piece, and as Heather said before, it's everybody's responsibility to report. Obviously, my PowerPoint is not up anymore, but If you can't remember the statewide central intake phone number, which is the 855-333-7233, if you dial pound safe from your cell phone, it'll put you straight through to Sky. And again, if a child shows up at 8 o'clock in the morning with bruises, please don't wait till 3:30 in the afternoon to call us when you know mom and dad are going to be there in 15 minutes. Because I would much rather come out at 8:30 in the morning with law enforcement, assess the situation and make sure it's safe for that child to go home before they go back home to their perpetrator. And again, no, you do not have to leave your name when you're making a report. You have the ability to do so. Even if your name and phone number is on that report, when we go out to do those investigations, we do not allow our parents to read the report directly out of our hands. We go over allegations in the report with the parent, and we will read the narrative to them so that they understand what is being reported. Because again, the transparency piece requires us to be upfront with what's being reported. However, we do not disclose who is reporting. I have parents all the time ask me, well, who reported me? I'm sorry, even if I did know, I can't tell you that. Just like if I go out and I talk to their kids and then I call mom, I said, hey, you know, I just interviewed your kid at the daycare, I interviewed your kiddo at the school. I'd really like to meet with you to talk about this report that I received. Oh, well, you went and saw my kid? Well, aren't I supposed to be present for that? I said, absolutely not. When it comes to child abuse, our cases are civil cases, and we are not looking at the child as a perpetrator in a crime. So we are not required to have parents present during our interviews. And actually, most of the time, parents are our perpetrators. It's my job to keep them safe from the person who's hurting them. I'm not going to let the person who's hurting them sit next to me while I'm interviewing that child. When we go out to schools, another thing that a lot of people don't know is that we need to talk to the children alone. That means no outside influence. So no trusted teachers, no, you know, I've had social workers that really just want to know what's going on that will come and try and sit in with me, and I've asked them to leave because these kids don't have an obvious relationship with that person. They're not comfortable with them, and I'm not going to sit somebody in the room that this child is not comfortable with to talk to them about what's going on at home. Sure.
Is it appropriate when an investigator goes to do an investigation, especially with a child, say 3 years old, to constantly be picking up their phone and answering their phone?
Unfortunately, because of our staffing, they're required to. When we have a kiddo being interviewed by an investigator, it could be a lower priority report that they're out on, and they may be up for the next high priority. So they have to answer the phone. And they've also got their supervisor chiming in, asking questions, and needing clarification on information that's being relayed. So.
If an investigator comes to kitty and is in a private space where they can talk to a 3-year-old that is socially and emotionally delayed, their attention span is only so, there's a small window there. And the child begins to speak aloud while the investigator is looking at them, and they obviously are uncomfortable, unfamiliar. And the phone is constant. I'm talking in a 5-minute period at least 35 times.
That should have not happened. And
Where do I report that?
you would want to talk to the supervisor. If you want to meet with me afterwards, I can figure out who that was, because I can definitely relay the information to their supervisor. Like I said, it's one thing if they look at a text message really quick because the supervisor has a question. It's a completely different thing if they're constantly on their phone. Like I said, we are required to answer our supervisors if they call when we're in the field, regardless of what we're doing. However, there are limitations to that. And if you've got a developmentally delayed child that's very, very limited on their verbal skills, and you've got like a 3-second span where you're going to get a conversation out of them, I'm not going to get mad at my worker if they're in the middle of an interview with that person for not answering me immediately, because I know that that interview isn't going to last more than maybe 5 minutes. And even if I've got an emergency report, they're going to be able to call me back before our timeline's running out. So, but get with me after this and I'll find out more information from you. because I am one of the supervisors. I just don't know if it was my worker. I doubt it was my worker because my workers don't come in until after hours, but there are benefits to leaving your name and phone number. We are required to send a disposition letter to our reporting parties if they leave their contact information. So that's something that just came out. So it's actually a new rollout, but it's already built into our system to automatically develop that as long as we have that contact information. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. And again, you will not get in trouble for calling in a report. As long as your report is being made in good faith, we have no issues with reports being made. The biggest concern that I have is there are times when I feel like parents are being retaliated against because of poverty issues, because poverty is not neglect. There's a very big difference. So that being said, I don't see a lot of that from our daycares. I do see it more from our schools. But that's one of those things that, yes.
So that is one of my questions, so my staff is aware and knows. So if a parent is homeless and given the weather, the situation, and they're living in a tent, that is not child abuse,
No.
correct?
No, it is not. So as long as we show up and they've got access to clean water, they've got access to food, and they've got access to facilities, it doesn't have to be direct access. I mean, if they're living in a tent out in the woods, they can go dig a hole and go to the bathroom in it, and that's still safe. Excuse me. So when you do make your reports, the one thing that I do ask is that you have as much information as possible. We received one report from a daycare in Farmington, I'm not going to say which one, where the mother was noted to be acting erratically, did not smell of alcohol, but definitely looked like she was under the influence of something. Was walking around town in the heat with the baby in a stroller, had no water, no food, and was nodding off while filling out an application for daycare. Provided zero address, provided zero location, called a welfare check into law enforcement. Law enforcement showed up, let mom go, and we never found her again. So those are circumstances where I'm a little bit more concerned, when we have zero information and we don't have any way to find the family. I've actually received reports from a daycare that was child's name, parent A, parent B, child A, child B for the siblings, unknown names, dates of birth, no ages, no address, no phone number. They live somewhere around this area. So as much information as you can give. Yes. I didn't see you back there, sorry.
So let's say they report it, and then a week later the child's showing more signs, like it's getting worse. Mm-hmm. Are they supposed to?
Yes. I would reach out to the assigned investigator and see if they've added allegations or if they're still working it. But if the investigator doesn't contact you back, report it again. I'm an investigation supervisor, and I can tell you I absolutely hate getting multiple reports on the same case when we have the same allegations. But even if it doesn't screen in as a second report, it's going to come in as a screened out report, and it'll be an activity note that, hey, we're still seeing these behaviors. So when it comes to the information to report, I've kind of got a checklist here. I don't know that anybody has anything to write it down with, but if you reach out to me, I can get it to you later. We definitely need the child's name, age, date of birth, and gender. If you have all of that information, definitely being a daycare, I would hope you would have that. If you know it, all of the household members' names. Their current location. So if they're currently at the daycare when you call this in, I would definitely say that they're there. If the child has already gone home for the day, mom came and picked them up at 10 o'clock in the morning after dropping them off at 8, whatever the case may be, just let us know that they're at home. We definitely need the parent's name and their address. If you have it, their date of birth. We need the names and ages of other children in the home. If you know it, Like I said, I don't expect you guys to have every ounce of information on these families, but I've filled out a daycare application recently, so I know how much information is on them. And then definitely be very specific in what your suspicion is. So like, they're gonna ask questions at Sky, but if you've got additional information that they don't ask you about, please feel free to provide that because it gives us a better idea of what we're walking into. Yes?
Young lady in the purple shirt had a question. Jolene.
So I have a question. So you talked about how they called it in to the police and police didn't follow up. I feel like that's a law enforcement issue. So would you make 2 separate reports? I might have missed that.
No, so basically they called law enforcement. Law enforcement did show up. They checked in with mom while she was at the park, but they waited until after this mom had nodded off, slept a little bit off, went to the park after filling out the application. That should have been a situation where you called while she was in the midst of the behavior. Because if we can't prove it when we show up, there's nothing we can do about it. And then of course, if they are homeless and we don't have a location for them, we won't find them and there's no telling what's gonna happen from there. And then if you know it, we definitely need to know whether or not the family are tribal members because we are required to notify the tribe anytime that we get an open investigation on a tribal member. Regardless of whether they live on tribal land or in Farmington, the tribe is always involved in every decision-making process through every one of our cases. So if you know that there's other witnesses or other people that may have information regarding what's going on in the home, if you can provide that information, that's helpful for us as well. If you know of other relatives' names and phone numbers that we can contact. I know that a lot of people will have, backups set up for their pickups. They may be beneficial people that will have information, or they may be people we can contact if it comes to the point where, hey, we're gonna have to remove this kiddo today, If you know that the family are avid gun user or gun owners and they're not super safe with the way that they store them, whatever you happen to know about the family is going to be helpful. You'll be asked about all of that when you call Sky. They're going to ask if you know whether there are animals in the home. They're going to ask if you know whether or not there's weapons in the home. Anything that you can provide is going to be important information when it comes to the reporting. And last but not least, we're going to go into the actual investigations process itself because, again, with you guys reporting, we are going to be reaching out to you. We use our daycares as collaterals on a regular basis, and we primarily want to talk with the classroom teacher or the people who have the most contact with that child because they're going to have more insight on behaviors, they're going to have more insight on changes in behaviors, and we're going to be able to get that information that we need in order to move forward. I'm not going to go over the stats because the stats that I have are from 2023. I will say that when it comes to 2023, statewide, there were 20,592 reports screened into Sky. 1,193 of them came to San Juan County. We receive approximately 100 to 150 reports per month these days, and it's just getting to be more and more. When it comes to what happens once we get involved, obviously once you call Sky and they screen a report in, we have 3 different priorities of report. We have a priority 2 report, which our investigators have up to 5 days to respond. We have a priority 1 report, which we have up to 24 hours to respond. And then our emergency reports, we have a 3-hour response time. Now, one thing you want to keep in mind with that 3-hour response time is that 3 hours means every child that is an alleged victim in that report must be seen and interviewed within that 3 hours. So if we know that those kids are in 3 different locations, please provide all of those locations. Because there's times when we have to send 2 people in 2 different directions to get it all done in time. And a lot of those emergency reports require us to take law enforcement with us as well. And I'm not going to say that the system is perfect because there are a lot of systemic issues, staffing, funding, the whole 9 yards. So anything that we can do to try and make sure that we're meeting those timelines, those are federal guidelines that we are required to follow in order to meet the standards to get our federal funding. But I mean, staffing in our office, just for example, we have a total of 10 investigators for San Juan County. Of those 10, we currently only have 5 taking reports, which means that 100 to 150 reports is being dispersed between 5 people right now. So if they are slow to respond, that's going to be why. They're basically chasing their tails at this point, and I'm not making excuses for them because they do have supervisors that you should be able to contact. Their voicemail should be set up, their supervisor's information should be listed in their voicemail so that you can have access there as well. So when we go out to investigate these homes, our primary focus is going to be how can we help this family stay together? And it may mean that we're gonna go out, we've got a kiddo that's been whipped with a belt and he's got a belt mark across his face and one across his back. I'm not gonna leave the child in the home with the person who did that. But that doesn't mean I have to put that child in custody either. If we can get the cooperation of the family, we can have what's called a 5-day respite set up on a safety plan. Send the child to a relative or somebody who is fit and appropriate to care for that child. And then we can work with the family to get services in place. And a lot of times those are things that we're gonna end up putting in-home services in so that we have eyes in that home. We don't just leave them completely unsupervised. I know that we catch a lot of grief from people, why didn't you take this kid? It's not that simple. We have to convince either a judge or law enforcement that it's not safe for that child to go home. And Heather can attest to that too. We work very closely with our law enforcement, and Aztec has been really good about working with us in regards to concerns within certain homes. But we have other agencies that aren't as cooperative. So just keep in mind that what it boils down to is, even if I have a safety concern and I'm at a home with a law enforcement officer and I'm like, well, this kid is 6 years old and he looks like he's 3. He's underweight. Mom pulled out a feeding tube that should have been removed by a medical professional. And I've got a medical provider saying that this child is going to die if we don't pick him up. And that agency says, well, sorry, there's nothing I can do about it. Now I have to go back to the office and write an affidavit. That affidavit then goes to a judge, and then whenever the judge finally reads it and signs off on it, that's when we can go and pick up a child. So just knowing that, you know, we are doing our investigations, but our investigations are also voluntary, which means if a parent decides not to cooperate with our investigation, we have to prove all of this without their help. And so it does kind of convolute things. And I want you all to be aware that, you know, we are going out, we are investigating with these families, but we are still trying to keep these kids with family members. Because again, even if a parent is beating their child every single day, that is all that child has ever known. They still love their parents regardless of what their parents have done to them. So when we go out and we remove those kids, it is a traumatic event for them. So keeping them with family is our primary focus. If we still have to file for custody in order to keep that child safe, we're still going to look for a relative that we can license. And that's somebody who's able to keep boundaries, somebody who's able to provide a safe and stable home, and somebody who is able to pass all of the background checks required to become a licensed home. Can somebody tell me what the difference between risk and danger is? Do you know what the difference between risk and danger is? Go ahead.
Risk happens over time and danger is like immediate, or is it the opposite?
No, it's pretty much correct. So I like to use this slide for just about everything. It's the sign of the deer crossing or the actual deer in the road. The sign of the deer crossing is a risk that there may be deer up ahead. That deer in the road is like, okay, if you don't stop, you're gonna hit it. So there's the difference. You know, if I send this kid home today, is there a risk that he's gonna be injured? Possibly. If I send this kid home today, am I sure he's gonna be injured? Absolutely. Those are the differences. Like, I mean, you can see the signs. The risk is gonna be there regardless. Even if we mitigate the danger right now, there's always going to be a risk that that's going to happen again. And so we have to look at how do we address that risk piece to prevent the danger from happening again. So aside from law enforcement and the courts, there is one other circumstance where a child can be placed on a hold, and that's by medical professionals. That being said, that hold generally means that the medical professionals are not going to discharge that child from the hospital for whatever reason. And at that point, they're working with us and law enforcement in order to get that longer term solution to that specific problem. And so, again, I kind of touched on this a little bit ago when it comes to interviewing kids at school and at daycare. CYFD may interview children at school without notifying the parents. As a supervisor, I can approve my people to interview the kids prior to notifying the parents, but we are required, once we have conducted those interviews, to notify the parents within 24 hours. If we do not notify them within 24 hours, then we are in violation. So just be aware that, yes, we can come in, we can interview the kids. We don't even have to notify the parents that we're coming, but we will be notifying them. And my people will generally, immediately after we leave, call the parent. We are also allowed to interview the children alone while they're at school or at daycare. We've had some schools that have said, no, we're required to have the principal or the social worker in the room while you do it. No. And the reason for that is because kids are more apt to say something that they think this other person wants them to say when that person is in the room, especially if it's like a social worker that they've been working with for a long period of time, or if it's an auntie or a cousin, somebody that they trust. That person may have already fed them information, and that child may be expected to relay whatever that information is. And it may not be intentional. It could just be like, the kid said, oh, daddy hit me. And then the person dug for more information. Okay, well, what did he hit you with? Did he leave a bruise? Did he do this? Those are not questions that even I'm going to ask as an investigator. Because in reality, if we've got a physical abuse case, I would rather have that child go through that forensic interview, have law enforcement involved, and make sure that we're doing things the right way, so that way any disclosures that are made are able to be used in a court setting. So that way people are actually prosecuted to the level that they deserve to be prosecuted. And so that the children are able to tell their story without adding whatever little pieces of information they think that these adults in their life wanted them to add. Because children are natural people pleasers. So they're gonna look at your expressions, they're gonna read your body language. And if you're sitting there anticipating a specific response, they're gonna try and give that to you. And just to give you a heads up, if we request that you're not present during our interview, please don't take offense to it, because the reason I just told you right now is the reason why we want to interview the child alone. Because we can ask those non-leading questions, we can ask those objective questions without actually kind of steering the conversation in any specific direction. A lot of times people don't realize that they're steering a conversation with a child just because they're asking a question. But when you start adding specific details into your question, you're automatically fishing for a response that child's going to want to give you, because they want you to be happy with their response. I know that was a lot of information and I'm really sorry, but does anybody have any questions for me?
Call me, mom or dad or whomever is asking the staff member to call them if CYFD comes. What do they do?
So, I mean, if the parent asks you to do that, I mean, that's your prerogative. My big thing with it is this: if we show up and want to talk to a child, we're going to talk to the child. But if you call mom and say, well, they're here, they're talking to your kiddo, you would be, I believe, in violation of the criminal code if they were to stop us from interviewing. Am I correct, Heather?
So my rule, don't call the parents.
I'm making Heather come back up here. What's that? Yeah, we'll call them within 24 hours, and I can tell you right now, if it's one of the people that's on my team, they're gonna call them 30 seconds after they walk out of the door from your place. Go ahead.
So on the criminal side, they can't prevent CYFD from doing that. My biggest thing is, why are they telling you to call them? Like, why are they doing that if you don't have anything to hide? And so it also kind of creates an issue. If you call them, then they're gonna come in heated when there might not be anything to it. We will still advise, we'll still talk to the kids, but we just don't want to create a disturbance that doesn't need to be there until after the kids. We can both explain on our side, look, this is what we're gonna do, and this is why we did it, whether they like it or not, to each their own, but we're still gonna do our job, and it just makes it easier on the front end if we don't have that confrontation before and then the kid sees their parents all worked up and all that kind of stuff, so.
Yeah.
So let's say that there's a family and it's like they live in a very overcrowded house and it's like very dirty. They have pests, infestations, stuff like that. They will send their kid to daycare or school or whatever, and they're wearing like soiled clothes and they're dirty. Would that qualify as like neglect?
To a certain degree, yes. But the problem is that can also fall under that poverty piece. The big thing with that is go ahead and report it, because we can still go out and we can offer them resources. Once we've offered them the resources, what they do with it determines our next steps if we get another report. Because if I show up and I'm like, you know what, I've got this resource, they're gonna help us get you some pest control. I've got this other resource that's gonna help you get some of this trash out of this house. Obviously, if the house is overcrowded, we live in a community where there are a lot of multi-generational homes. It doesn't matter how many people are living in that home, as long as that child has a safe and warm place to sleep. We prefer that they're not co-sleeping with their parents, just because that's one of the biggest causes of infant death is parents rolling over on their kids. But ultimately, like I said, as long as we can come out and offer them resources, we're not gonna walk in guns a-blazing and just rip kids out unless it's completely unsanitary. There's animal feces everywhere, there's rotting food. You know, those are things that are not appropriate. And it also depends on the age of the child and their developmental capabilities. So like, I'm not gonna take a 17-year-old out of a house that has animal feces on the floor, because that 17-year-old is just as capable of cleaning up that animal feces as their parents are. But if I've got a 2, 3, 4-year-old running around in a house, there's animal feces and urine and rotting food, I'm gonna have a concern with that. And I think Heather is also.
Like, just because we can take kids, there's certain standards that we have to have lawfully as well. We don't have to have like the court order that they do. We just have to call what's have reasonable grounds, but we just have to have enough that says like they're in a dangerous situation, and it's not necessarily because we're taking them away from their family forever. It's just to get them resources, make sure that they're safe. We do safety plans over taking kids any day if we can. But neglect is a little bit hard, because just because it's dirty, just because they have pests, the DA's office and state statutes and all won't fall under that. We're with them. We just want to be able to offer resources. And if it continues or get worse, then we can kind of go through that area. And we work with them as far as if they're not listening to them, we can always say, hey, you might be looking at criminal charges. We might file criminal charges, but say, hey, as long as you work with them, then we won't go through it. So we try to offer resources and try to do that before we start doing the rest of it.
And the thing is I mean, everything is a process. Building a case for neglect is a long process. A lot of our cases that we file on for neglect have anywhere from 10 to 25 prior reports that we have gone out and we have offered services. We've gone out and physically cleaned their houses for them. We've gone out and we've introduced people to help them with resources. And we've basically held their hand through everything. And then as soon as we close our case, they cancel their services. And now we're back in the same position that we were in the last time we were here. But like I said, the only time that we would ever request a removal of a child for a sanitary concern is if I go in there and I say, okay, well, this is not safe for this child. Who do you know that this child is close to that they can stay with until you can get this cleaned up? And we're gonna work with them and see. And obviously, if we do decide to safety plan with somebody, I'm gonna run a criminal background, a CPS background, a sex offender registry check. And then if we've got law enforcement present with us at that time, we're also gonna ask law enforcement to run a triple I on these people, because we wanna make sure that the person that mom and dad are leaning on aren't going to go take them and make pornography with them, or, you know, dump them in a field somewhere, because that's happened in the past as well. So, I mean, ultimately a safety plan, a fit and willing relative, those are all our ultimate goals. But we have, and we will, again, I'm sure, write those affidavits, because maybe it doesn't rise to the level that law enforcement has the ability to place that child on hold, but we're still not comfortable with that child being in that situation. And I know that it's been kind of a crazy year this year, so. Any other questions?
So you guys go and do the home visits before you place these children in the homes, that's after, right?
Yes, so after we run those background checks and they're cleared criminally through CPS and the sex offender registry, as soon as we're done running those backgrounds, the worker who's out in the field with the family will then follow that relative to their residence and do a complete walkthrough of the home to make sure that it is also safe and appropriate for that child to be there.
And what if they never show up for a home visit to go and see if that house is okay for them to stay? Like, just say.
I'm like, if that happened and you know for a fact that happened, I need to know about it. So if it's not the worker's direct supervisor, somebody in one of the supervisors in our office needs to know about it, because it is a requirement for the worker who went out and created that safety plan for the child to be placed with a relative to go out and assess the home of the person who the child was staying with.
They did have a safety plan, they went to another home.
Mm-hmm.
They stayed there, but they were also supposed to check the other parent's home and never showed up.
Okay, so the other parent didn't have the children though.
No, like, he was able to see them and everything, but she never came out to do the home visit. So we got paperwork for the whole case.
And the report was against the other parent's home or the home that they responded to? Okay, and that may have been part of it, but in theory, the biological parents are supposed to be notified. Huh?
They didn't let her keep them in her home. They had to take her off.
Okay, we'll talk about that after this, because I'm very curious about what that whole dynamic is. There's a lot of different factors that play into it, but when we run our investigations, one thing that I have to be honest with you guys about, because a lot of parents are like, well, I don't want his dad to know. Too bad. I have to notify both biological parents that we have an open investigation. If there's a situation where we're safety planning and one of the children is going to their biological parent, that we would be following that child to that biological parent's house to assess the home. If that child did not go to the biological parent, but they went somewhere else, we would assess the home that they were staying at, not necessarily the other biological parent. Any other questions? I have lots of answers. Go ahead.
So if the parent decided to like discipline the kid themselves, because maybe they were bad, and they discipline would we get in trouble if we didn't go that side, that we were all different perspectives on discipline.
I mean, I wouldn't report specific discipline. It's not illegal to spank your children, and I want you all to know that. There's a difference between spanking your child and beating your child. What's that?
It's not against the law.
It's not illegal to spank your kids.
No.
This is not against the law. This is against the law.
Yeah, you can spank your kids. That's not illegal. And a lot of kids have that misconception that my parents can't spank me. It's a very gray area, but you can't physically harm them. So you can't cause bruises. You can't do that thing. I mean, you can discipline your kids, but there's a fine line between discipline and abuse. So I mean, it's kind of clear when I hit you with a belt and it's leaving bruises to where you can see the inlines of it, as opposed to I spanked you on the butt for a discipline kind of a thing. So I mean, and if you're not sure, report it.
Yep.
Did you have a question?
So during an investigation, how does an investigator determine whether the child's answers are being coached up?
I'll be honest with you, we can usually tell when children are being coached. And I'll tell you this right now, a lot of the reports that we get are parents that are in the middle of a custody battle, and they are fighting with each other over custody, and they are each coaching that child to say different things about the other parent. The big thing with it is that the reason that we interview children alone is because we don't want those outside influences impacting our interviews with the kids. But a lot of times when kids are saying things that, I'm talking to a 4-year-old and he said, well, my dad beat the shit out of my mom. Really? Or, well, my dad, he's, and they pause, and then they have to think about what their answer is going to be. You can tell exactly what they're being coached to say. Or they're using words that are a little bit more advanced than what their developmental level is. They're using words that they've been taught to use so that they can make it sound worse. And that's why when we get an allegation, so say I get a report on a 6-year-old for physical abuse and the reporting party is mom, and I go out and I talk to this kid and there's no bruising like she reported. There's no indication that this child has been injured. The child just came back from dad's house. I still have to see the child in mom's home. I have to do mom's home assessment because that's where the child is at that very moment. But then I also have to go out and assess dad's home because the allegations are technically against the father. And so I have to talk to the dad and I have to say, you know, I've got this allegation. But you can tell when kids are coached. Kids are not the best actors in the world. I don't know if you guys caught that or not, but there are some that are better than others. And the reason for that is because they've been coached for so long. But ultimately, we have to differentiate between what's the truth and what's not the truth. And the one thing that I always tell my investigators is that there's 3 sides to every story. There's his side, there's her side, and then there's the real side. So everybody's gonna elaborate on the things that are, you know, this was against me, it's not my fault, it's not my fault, it's this person's fault. Oh no, it's not my fault, it's not my fault, it's this person's fault. When in reality, it's both of their fault. And dragging their kids into the middle of that is one of my biggest pet peeves as an investigator. I saw another hand go up. Go ahead.
My question is, would the reporting be just as if kids are in foster care and they are being abused or being touched while with the foster parents?
Yes. We investigate our foster homes just like we investigate any other home. We don't have any bias against that. Like, we don't give special treatment to our foster homes. These homes were licensed because they were able to pass the backgrounds, they were able to go through the process, and it's a very grueling process to become licensed. But if something is going on in that home, we need to know about it. And a lot of times, depending on the allegations and the circumstances, we'll pull every single child that's placed in that home until we can get through that investigation. Yes, ma'am.
Let's say, like, the family doesn't have, like, extended family or places the educators might open their home to them, like.
So you're saying if the family doesn't have any relative support and they need a safety plan, if they trust you and that child has a relationship with you, we can look at you as what's called fictive kin. So if it comes to the point where we need a safety plan with a non-relative, we can do that as long as it's somebody that the child has a close relationship with and the parents are willing to provide the contact for that person. The other piece of that is if it comes to the point where we do have to file for physical custody of that child, we can also look at that person as a long-term placement option as long as they're willing to go through the home study process. Yes, ma'am.
So during the investigation, so if law enforcement, CYFD, and the forensic investigator, they all come to a disagreement, who has the final say?
There's not a final say. In reality, there's 2 different burdens of proof when it comes to our investigations. Their criminal investigations have a much higher burden of proof than ours do. So if it comes to the point where we're all uncomfortable with it, but they just don't have enough, then we're going to staff it with our legal department and say, hey, look, this is the circumstances that we have. Law enforcement is concerned, but they don't have enough to file charges. This is what we have on this investigation. And then we talk with our legal department and we work on getting that affidavit filed as long as we can. If we still don't have enough, and especially with our ICWA cases, which is our Native American cases, we have to do significant efforts before removing a child. So there's a lot that goes into that process. And that list of things that we have to do keeps growing as the years continue to go by, and that's okay. The one thing I can tell you is that in our county specifically, because we are right in the middle of the Navajo Nation, And we have a lot of tribal families that we work with. We treat all of our families as if they were ICWA cases. It doesn't matter if you're white, black, yellow, green, blue, or purple. We're going to treat every case the exact same way. If we have a mom who is struggling to get their kiddo to medical appointments, we're going to have them sign a waiver and we're going to transport them to the next medical appointment to make sure that we get those needs met. We're going to do what we have to do to try and help our families get the resources that they need. But the problem is we have to have the collaboration of the family as well.
Another side of that too, I can talk loud enough. We have what's called a multidisciplinary team, which is all law enforcement within San Juan County, CYFD. We have SANE, we have legal, and we meet once a month. So if we have a case that any of us feel like, hey, we kind of need to talk about this and kind of brainstorm where to go from here. There's also CART, like she talked about, which is the Child Abuse Response Team, which is based out in Albuquerque. They'll also hop on and we'll have like a Zoom meeting and say, okay, well, this is what we've got. What can we do? And we'll brainstorm on like different ideas and do that kind of thing. So we look at it from like a multidisciplinary side and see how we can help the family, what we can do, that kind of thing. Any other questions? Okay.
Awesome. Thank you guys for your time. I appreciate it.
Before you leave,
I've got like 12 freaking paper clips over here.
all right, that worked out.